There are places in Australia where you can drive for hours and see almost nothing. No towns, no traffic, sometimes not even another person. Just an endless road, red dirt, and that huge Australian sky. But every now and then, hidden somewhere out there, you'll find something that really shouldn't be there. An empty hotel. An old railway station. The remains of a school. Streets with names but no houses left on them. These places weren't always empty. Some were home to hundreds, even thousands of people. Miners came looking for fortunes, families built homes, businesses opened, and for a while, these towns felt like they would be around forever. Then the money disappeared, the mines closed, the trains moved on, and people simply left. In some cases, almost an entire town vanished in a matter of weeks. So today, we're heading deep into the Australian Outback to visit 7 ghost towns that were once full of life. And the last one is different from all the others, because people didn't just leave when the jobs disappeared. They left because staying there could kill them. Number 7 is Farina, South Australia. If you saw Farina today, you'd probably wonder why anyone decided to build a town here in the first place. It's dry, isolated, and surrounded by the kind of landscape where finding shade can feel like an achievement. But back in the 1870s, this part of South Australia looked surprisingly promising. There had been good rain, the land appeared suitable for growing crops, and settlers began imagining farms spreading across the region. In 1878, a town was established, and it was eventually given the name Farina, a name linked to flour. That tells you exactly what people hoped this place would become. They believed wheat would grow here, farmers would make money, and a permanent community would rise out of the desert. There was just one fairly serious problem with that plan. The rain they were counting on didn't keep coming. The dry conditions returned, crops struggled, and the dream of turning this part of the outback into reliable farming country started falling apart. Normally, that might have been the end of Farina, but then the railway arrived in 1882 and gave the town a completely new reason to exist. Suddenly, Farina became an important stopping point. Livestock, supplies, and passengers moved through the area, businesses opened, and the population eventually reached around 600 people. There were hotels where travelers could get a drink, shops, churches, a school, a post office, and even an underground bakery, built that way partly to escape the brutal heat above ground. For a remote settlement, Farina was doing pretty well. But here's the problem with building your town around a railway. You need the railway to keep needing you. As the line was extended farther north, Farina became less important. Trains could continue beyond it, business moved elsewhere, and one family after another packed up and left. Today, much of Farina is ruins. Stone walls stand without roofs, old buildings sit open to the weather, and the desert has moved back into spaces where people once lived. Number 6 is Cook, South Australia. Now imagine living in a place where your nearest neighbors aren't just down the road. They're way down the road. Cook sits on the Nullarbor Plain beside the Trans-Australian Railway, surrounded by an almost ridiculous amount of empty land. Look at aerial footage of the place, and it feels less like a town and more like someone accidentally dropped a few buildings in the middle of nowhere. But Cook wasn't built randomly. It was established in 1917 because the railway needed it. In the days of steam locomotives, running trains across Australia was a huge operation. Engines needed servicing, tracks needed workers, supplies had to be managed, and those workers needed somewhere to live. So Cook became a railway community. People didn't just work here, families lived here. Imagine finishing your shift, walking home, looking in every direction and knowing there were hundreds of kilometers of empty country around you. And then technology got better. Steam trains were replaced by diesel locomotives, railway operations became more efficient, and suddenly you didn't need as many people living permanently in places like Cook. Jobs disappeared and families moved away. That's a familiar story with ghost towns, but Cook has one detail that makes it especially strange: the railway never died. Trains still pass right through the settlement. So you have this almost empty town sitting beside a working railway line. A huge train can roll in, fill the place with noise and movement, and for a moment Cook almost looks alive again. Then it pulls away across the Nullarbor and everything becomes quiet. Buildings that once served a real community are left standing beside the tracks, surrounded by flat lands stretching toward the horizon. Number 5 is Mary Kathleen, Queensland. Mary Kathleen is probably one of the strangest ghost towns in Australia because, from the ground, parts of it barely look like a town at all. You'll find roads, curbs, and concrete slabs, but many of the buildings those roads were made for are gone. It's almost like someone picked up the town and carried it away. And in a way, that's pretty close to what happened. Mary Kathleen was built in Queensland after uranium was discovered in the area during the 1950s. This wasn't some messy collection of tents thrown together by prospectors. It was a planned mining town built for workers and their families, with proper homes, streets, shops, a school, and sporting facilities. People moved there expecting a normal life. Kids went to school, neighbors knew each other, and everyday workers traveled out to the mine. For a town sitting in remote Queensland, Mary Kathleen was surprisingly modern. But underneath all of that was a simple fact. Without uranium, there was no Mary Kathleen. The mine operated in 2 main periods before finally closing in 1982. And when it closed for good, there wasn't another industry waiting to keep the town alive. People moved away and much of the settlement was eventually dismantled. Houses and buildings disappeared, but the roads stayed. That's what makes walking around the old site so unusual today. You can follow streets that once led people home, except the homes aren't there anymore. Nearby is the old open-cut uranium mine, which is filled with bright blue water. In photos, it can look almost tropical, especially against the dry landscape around it. But this isn't some hidden outback swimming pool. It's a former uranium mine, and authorities have warned about hazards around the site, including mine-affected water and other contamination risks. Number 4 is Arltunga, Northern Territory. For number 4, we're going back to a time when hearing one word could convince people to travel into some of the harshest country in Australia. That word was gold. In 1887, gold was discovered east of what is now Alice Springs, and soon prospectors began making their way into the region. Arltunga grew from that rush and became Central Australia's first official town. But this wasn't the kind of gold rush where you stepped off a train, checked into a hotel, and started looking for treasure the next morning. Reaching the area itself was difficult. Water was scarce, supplies were expensive, summer temperatures were brutal, and miners were trying to survive in an environment that didn't care whether they found gold or not. Still, people came. That's the strange power gold had. A rumor about a rich discovery could convince someone to leave behind a comfortable life and head into the desert with no guarantee they'd ever make money. A settlement formed around the gold fields. Miners dug into the hills, stone buildings appeared, and businesses tried to make money from the people chasing their fortunes. But here's something that gets forgotten in stories about gold rushes. Most people don't end up rich. The easy gold becomes harder to find, mining gets more expensive, and sooner or later another discovery somewhere else starts sounding more exciting. That's what happened around Arltunga. The rush faded, people moved on, and the town slowly became quiet. Today, the area is preserved as a historical reserve, and you can still see old stone buildings, mine workings, and pieces of the settlement scattered through the landscape. Number 3 is Silverton, New South Wales. At number 3 is a town that isn't completely dead, but it came surprisingly close. Silverton sits near Broken Hill in New South Wales, and during the 1880s it was one of those places where everything seemed to happen at once. Mineral discoveries brought prospectors into the barrier ranges, word spread, and suddenly people started pouring in. In 1883, Silverton had only a few hundred residents. Not long after that, its population had grown to around 3,000. Think about how quickly that changes a place. One year you're looking at open country, and a short time later there are hotels, shops, homes, businesses, and crowded streets. Miners needed food and equipment, so shopkeepers arrived. Workers wanted somewhere to drink, so hotels opened. Families arrived, professionals followed, and Silverton started behaving like a town that expected to become a major center. Then Broken Hill happened. Much larger mineral deposits were being developed nearby, and once people realized where the bigger opportunity was, Silverton began losing the very people who had built it. Miners moved. Businesses followed their customers. Buildings were abandoned or moved, and the population dropped. But Silverton managed to avoid disappearing completely. A small community remained, and years later the landscape around the town found a completely different use: movies. The empty roads, old buildings, and harsh desert scenery made the area perfect for filmmakers, and Silverton became especially famous for its connection to Australian productions and Mad Max. That gives the town a strange feeling today. Number 2 is Gwalia, Western Australia. Now this is where things get really interesting, because Gwalia didn't slowly fade away over generations. When the reason for the town disappeared, most of the people disappeared with it incredibly fast. Gwalia grew around the Sons of Gwalia gold mine in Western Australia. Mining brought hundreds of workers into this remote part of the country, including many migrants from Europe, and a proper community developed around them. There were houses, shops, churches, a school, and places for workers to meet after finishing a shift. More than 1,000 people called the area home. Children grew up there. Families had routines. People probably woke up each morning assuming the town would still be there years later. But almost every paycheck in Gwalia was connected, directly or indirectly, to the same hole in the ground. Then, in December 1963, the mine closed. Around 250 workers suddenly lost their jobs, and the effect on Gwalia was immediate. Why stay in an isolated mining town when the mine no longer employed you? Families started packing. People boarded trains and left to find work elsewhere. In less than 3 weeks, the population reportedly crashed from around 1,200 people to roughly 40. Just imagine watching that happen from one of the houses that remained occupied. 1 week, you have neighbors on both sides. A few days later, one house is empty. Then another. The local families you know are gone. The streets become quieter every day until almost everyone has disappeared. That's what makes Gwalia so fascinating today. Parts of the old settlement have been preserved, including miners' cottages and other historic buildings, so the place doesn't feel like a pile of ancient ruins. It feels much more recent, almost as if people could come back. But most of them never did. Number 1 is Wittenoom, Western Australia. Our number 1 town wasn't abandoned because the gold ran out, because trains stopped needing workers, or because another town became more successful. Wittenoom was abandoned because the place itself had become dangerous. Located in Western Australia's Pilbara region, Wittenoom developed around blue asbestos mining. At the time, asbestos was considered a valuable industrial material. It was used in buildings and products around the world, so mining it meant jobs and money. Workers came to Wittenoom, houses were built, and families moved in. There was a school, shops, and a community. If you'd visited during its active years without knowing the full story, you might have seen an ordinary remote mining town. But every day, incredibly small asbestos fibers were being released into the environment, and many workers were breathing in dust that could eventually kill them. The frightening thing about asbestos is that the danger isn't dramatic. There's no explosion and no cloud that immediately makes everyone run. The fibers can be microscopic, and diseases linked to exposure may take decades to appear. Blue asbestos is especially dangerous, and people connected with Wittenoom later suffered serious asbestos-related illnesses, including mesothelioma. The mine finally closed in 1966, but the problem didn't leave with the workers. Contaminated waste remained around the area, and over the following decades authorities tried to empty the town. Services were removed, properties were acquired, residents were encouraged to leave, and Wittenoom eventually lost its official town status. For years, a small number of people still refused to go, making the story even stranger. But this is one ghost town where exploring the ruins is not worth the risk. When you look at these 7 places together, there's something almost strange about how normal their stories began. Nobody moved to Gwalia thinking it would become a ghost town. Nobody built a house in Mary Kathleen expecting the entire community to eventually be dismantled. The railway workers raising families in Cook probably couldn't imagine a future where trains would still pass through, but almost nobody would need to live there. These towns were built because people saw opportunity in some of the most isolated parts of Australia. Gold, uranium, farming, railways, asbestos, each one gave people a reason to come. And when that reason disappeared, the Outback was still there, waiting. That's probably what makes Australian ghost towns so fascinating. The buildings may look empty now, but they were never built to be ruins. Somebody opened that front door every morning. Somebody walked into that hotel after work. Somebody sat inside that classroom waiting for the school day to end. Then one day, the doors stopped opening.